Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're going to be taking a look at Chevron, ticker
Mm.
symbol CVX. We want to figure out if it deserves a spot in your portfolio, right?
Yeah,
And we've got a whole stack of articles and data, everything from their financials and market share to their recent acquisitions, and even some forays into alternative energy.
it's a very interesting time to be looking at a company like Chevron. They're facing the challenge of balancing their traditional oil and gas business with this increasing focus on sustainability and energy transition.
Right, and we should probably start with just a little bit of history. I was reading that Chevron actually traces its roots all the way back to the late 1800s.
Oh, wow.
A company called Star Oil. They struck it rich out in California.
That's right. That was the discovery in Pico Canyon that really kicked off the California oil boom. And from those, somewhat humble beginnings, Chevron ultimately grew through a series of mergers, most notably the acquisition of Gulf Oil in 1984, and then later Texaco in 2001.
Wow, those are some major deals. And speaking of big moves, they've been pretty active lately too, haven't they?
Absolutely. In 2020, they acquired Noble Energy for $5 billion, gaining a significant position in the Permian Basin, one of the most prolific shale plays in the U.S. And then just this year, they completed a massive $53 billion acquisition of Hess Corporation.
$53 billion. That's a huge bet. What were they after in that deal?
Well, that acquisition was really about expanding their footprint in a couple of key areas. First, it strengthened their position in the Bakken Shale, another major shale play up in North Dakota. But more importantly, it gave them a significant stake to the Stabroek Block, offshore Guyana.
Guyana. I haven't heard much about Guyana in terms of oil production.
It's a relatively new player, but Guyana is quickly emerging as a major oil-producing region. And that Stabroek Block, where Chevron now has a presence, is estimated to hold billions of barrels of recoverable oil. So it's seen as a major growth opportunity for Chevron, especially as production in more mature oil fields starts to decline.
Okay, so they're kind of doubling down on traditional oil and gas.
Hmm.
But with all the talk about the energy transition, are they doing anything in the alternative energy space?
They are, but it's a bit of a mixed bag. They've made some investments in renewable energy and clean technologies, but they're still very much an oil and gas company at their core.
Can you give me some specifics on what they're doing?
Sure, they have a history with geothermal energy, and they've been dabbling in biodiesel production, especially after acquiring Renewable Energy Group back in 2022.
So they're dipping their toes in the water, but not diving in head first.
Exactly. And they've also made some more futuristic bets, like investments in fusion power companies, Zap Energy and TAE Technologies. They also acquired a majority stake in a Utah hydrogen storage facility, which could potentially be the world's largest.
Fusion power and hydrogen storage. Interesting. It sounds like they're hedging their bets, trying to position themselves for multiple possible futures. But haven't they also faced some criticism for their environmental record?
Oh, absolutely. They've had their share of controversies, including Clean Air Act violations and concerns about their operations in countries with questionable human rights records. So these issues have definitely impacted their ESG score, which is something investors are paying more and more attention to these days.
Right, ESG is a big deal. It's not just about profits anymore. It's about how companies are impacting the environment and society. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about their financial performance. 2022 was a record-breaking year for them, wasn't it?
It was. They brought in $246.3 billion in revenue and a profit of $36.5 billion. Those are eye-popping numbers. But they also generated a lot of controversy.
Yeah, I remember there was a lot of talk about whether those profits were excessive, especially given the global energy crisis
Hmm.
and the impact on consumers.
It was a delicate situation. But high oil prices are good for oil companies. And Chevron, being the second largest oil company in the U.S. and the 31st most valuable company globally, benefited significantly.
So financially, they're in a strong position. But what about their stock? Is it a good buy right now?
Well, that's where things get a little bit more complex.
I bet. The oil and gas industry can be incredibly volatile.
You're telling me it's influenced by so many factors. Global demand, geopolitical events, government regulations. It can be a wild ride for investors.
So where does that leave us? What are analysts saying about Chevron's valuation right now?
There's a range of opinions, as you might expect. Some analysts are bullish on Chevron, pointing to their strong financials, their strategic acquisitions, and their potential for growth in places like Guyana. Others are more cautious, citing concerns about the long-term demand for oil and gas, the increasing pressure to transition to cleaner energy sources, and just the inherent volatility of the industry.
So a mixed bag from the experts. What about their dividend policy? Chevron has a reputation for being a reliable dividend payer, don't they?
Absolutely. They've consistently paid dividends for decades, and their current yield is around 4.03%, which is pretty attractive for income-focused investors.
That is appealing. And didn't they also announce a massive stock buyback program recently?
They did, $75 billion to be exact. That's a significant move. That suggests they believe their stock is undervalued. Buybacks can be a way for companies to return value to shareholders and boost their earnings per share.
Interesting. So we've talked about their history, their acquisitions, their foray into renewables, their financial performance, and their dividend policy. But we haven't touched on their services business. What exactly does that entail?
It's actually a significant part of their operations. Chevron isn't just an oil and gas producer. They also provide a wide range of services to other companies in the energy sector.
Like what kind of services?
Everything from drilling and well construction to logistics and project management. They even offer technical expertise and consulting services.
So they're not just playing the energy game, they're helping to shape the field itself.
Exactly. And that diversification adds another layer of complexity when we're trying to assess Chevron's overall value and stability.
It's like a company within a company. It makes you wonder, what kind of economic impact does a company like Chevron have globally? I mean, they're operating in so many different countries.
That's a crucial point. Their operations generate jobs, tax revenue, and investments in infrastructure. But there's also the flip side to consider.
You mean the environmental and social impact of their operations?
Exactly. That's where the whole ESG debate comes into play. Chevron's economic contributions are undeniable, but they have to be weighed against the environmental and social costs of their activities.
And as we discussed earlier, they face some valid criticism in that area.
They have, and it's something investors are increasingly scrutinizing. It's not just about financial returns anymore. Many investors are looking to align their investments with their values.
Right. ESG is becoming a bigger and bigger factor in investment decisions. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Is there anything else we should consider before wrapping up this deep dive into Chevron?
I think it's important to remember that the energy landscape is constantly evolving. What looks like a sure bet today might not be so certain tomorrow.
Good point. So where does that leave us? What are the key takeaways for someone trying to decide if Chevron is a good fit for their portfolio?
Well, I'd say the first step is to honestly assess your own investment goals and risk tolerance.
Right. Are you looking for growth income or a blend of both?
Exactly. And how much volatility are you comfortable with? Oil and gas is a cyclical industry, so there will be ups and downs.
And let's not forget those ESG factors.
Yeah.
If you're concerned about the environmental and social impact of your investments, you need to factor that in as well.
Absolutely. Do your research. Understand Chevron's ESG policies and a track record, and see if they align with your values.
So it's a complex decision. There's a lot to weigh. The potential for growth, the dividend income, the risks associated with the industry, and the ethical considerations.
It is. And if you're still on the fence after considering all those factors, it might be helpful to consult with a financial advisor.
That's always good advice. All right, so before we wrap up this deep dive into Chevron, I want to remind everyone to head over to our YouTube channel and let us know in the comments what other stocks or investment topics you'd like us to explore. We'd love hearing from you and getting your feedback.
We really do. Your insights help shape the show and keep us on our toes.
All right, let's wrap things up with some final food for thought for you to ponder. What are your closing thoughts on Chevron and their place in the ever-changing energy landscape?
Well, I think Chevron is a fascinating case study in how energy companies are trying to navigate this transition period. You know, they're straddling two worlds, the world of traditional fossil fuels and the world of cleaner, more sustainable energy sources.
Yeah, it seems like they're walking a tightrope,
Yeah.
trying to balance those demands from investors who want to see profits today with that growing pressure to address climate change and invest in a cleaner future.
Exactly. It's a very delicate balancing act. And they're making some moves in the renewable energy space. But are those moves bold enough? Are they moving fast enough? Those are the questions that I think investors need to be asking themselves.
It makes you wonder if they're truly committed to a sustainable future or just kind of trying to hedge their bets and appease their critics.
Right. And that's where I think the real challenge lies, not just for Chevron, but for the entire energy industry. How do you transition from a business model that's been so reliant on fossil fuels to one that's more sustainable and aligned with a low-carbon future?
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah,
and one that will require innovation investment and a willingness to embrace new technologies and business models.
absolutely. And it's a challenge that will have a profound impact on our planet and our collective future.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Chevron, what's the final takeaway for our listeners?
I'd say this. Chevron is a complex company operating in a complex industry. If you're considering adding them to your portfolio, don't just look at their financials. Look at their
Yeah.
strategy, their investments, and their commitment to a sustainable future. Ask yourself, does this company align with my values? Do I believe in their vision for the future?
Those are great questions to consider. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to invest in Chevron is a personal one. We've given you the information, the context, and the questions to ask. Now it's up to you to make the choice that aligns with your own investment goals, your risk tolerance, and your values.
And remember, the energy landscape is constantly evolving, so stay informed, keep learning, and never stop asking those tough questions.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Chevron. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the world of investing. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment letting us know what other stocks or investment topics you'd like us to cover.